The tomb of King Sety I is probably the finest ever built in the Valley of the Kings. It is the largest of the pharaonic monuments, it is the most complete in its decorative scheme and artistry, and the quality of that decoration is unsurpassed by any contemporary or successor. Among royal tombs, the monument of Queen Nefertari might be more famous for the brilliance of its colours and the superb quality of its preservation. But Nefertari's tomb was discovered much more recently than Sety's, and it has undergone more extensive conservation and protection. Sety's monument has suffered a little bit in the 200 years since it was discovered, but when you enter its halls, corridors, and stairways, you will inevitably be struck by its size, magnificence, and quality. Arguably, it is the finest royal tomb ever constructed. Sety's tomb came to light in 1817, when a team of Egyptian workers, employed by a man named Giovanni Belzoni, were working in the hills west of Luxor. So far, the team had made some impressive finds. The previous year, they had discovered the tomb of King I, the successor of Tutankhamun. Now, in October of 1817, the Egyptian labourers were digging in the central Valley of the Kings. They worked on a hillside facing to the south and east. So far, the work had been productive. On Friday, the 10th of October, the diggers uncovered the tomb of King Ramesses I, the father of Sety. That monument was small, just a staircase, corridor, and a single chamber with the stone sarcophagus. But the paintings on the walls were beautiful and well preserved. It was a minor tomb, insignificant in size and splendor compared to others already known in the valley. Nonetheless, Belzoni persisted on this southeastern hill, and he set his workers to digging a few meters up the road. At a glance, the new spot was not that promising. The Valley of the Kings experiences rainstorms and downpours that cascade over the cliffs and hills. As the water comes down, it naturally follows rivulets and ridges before pouring out in waterfalls. Belzoni had chosen the bottom of a waterfall as the next digging location. The leaders of his workforce thought this was a waste of time, but Belzoni described the work and his logic behind the choice in his account of the discovery. Quote, "On the 16th of October, I recommenced my excavations in the valley. Not 15 yards from the previous tomb, that of Ramesses I, I caused the earth to be opened at the foot of a steep hill, and under a torrent or waterfall, which, when it rains, pours a great quantity of water over the very spot. No one could imagine that the ancient Egyptians would make the entrance under just such a torrent, but I had strong reasons to suppose that there was a tomb in that place, from indications I had observed. The fellahin, or Egyptian workers, who were accustomed to dig, were all of the opinion that there was nothing in that spot. However, I continued the work, and the next day, the 17th, we perceived the part of the rock that was cut, and formed the entrance." End quote. Belzoni published this account in 1822, 5 years after the discovery, and it is easy to detect a little bit of hindsight glorification in the way he tells the story. In this version, Belzoni is the lone adventurer who discerns the possibility of a tomb, even though the local experts are all of the opinion that there is nothing. Whether this account is accurate to the true events, or an exaggeration bolstering Belzoni's prestige, we will never know for sure. But the location of digging, about 15 yards away from that of Ramesses I, was a productive site. The debris and rubble gave way to carved bedrock, evidence of ancient work, and over the next couple of days, the Egyptian labourers excavated the entrance to the tomb of Sety I. Sety's monument begins with a staircase leading from the surface down to the door. The entryway is undecorated, just bedrock, cut and smoothed. There are no hieroglyphs, and even if there were, Belzoni could not have read them. In 1817, the ancient Egyptian writing system remained mysterious. It would be several more years before Francois Champollion published his famous letter, making the first breakthroughs on decipherment. For now, in the heat and dust of the Valley of the Kings, the monument was an unnamed enigma. A stairway leading to a plain and undecorated door. Beyond lay the unknown. The team managed to cut a small opening through the debris. It wasn't wide, but the smallest member of the workforce, a chap named Yanni, stripped to his underwear and wriggled through the gap. As Yanni vanished into the darkness, Belzoni and his team waited. And waited. For the longest time, there was nothing. And when at last Yanni returned, he reported a corridor half full of debris and sloping down to a staircase. Then another corridor, followed by a yawning pit. Yanni's description was brief but exciting. He was the first individual to enter a tomb 3,000 years old, and he reported that it was decorated with splendid reliefs. Belzoni set his diggers to clearing away the entrance, making enough room for him to properly enter. While the labourers dig, let me describe Sety's tomb generally. The monument is a classic rock-cut sepulchre of the late 18th and early 19th dynasty style. What that means is that the tomb goes straight down into the bedrock, with staircases and corridors proceeding ever deeper. It is different architecturally from earlier models, where the tombs are bent, their corridors branching off in different directions rather than straight ahead. Sety followed the trends of his day, and his monument goes straight down and down and down. The main part of the tomb, from the entrance to the burial chamber, is 137 meters long, or 450 feet. In terms of space, the tomb measures approximately 1,900 cubic meters, or 67,000 cubic feet. That makes it the second largest tomb in the Valley of the Kings. To build it, the ancient stonemasons had to extract an enormous quantity of stone, more than 5 million kilograms of local limestone, or 11 million pounds. It was a massive undertaking that probably started as soon as Sety became the pharaoh, maybe even earlier. By the time of his death, the tomb had reached incredible dimensions and complexity. Along with the size, one of the distinguishing features of Sety's tomb is the style of its art. Sety followed the model introduced by Horemheb. The walls of his tomb are plastered, then drawn in sketch, and then cut back so that the figures stand out from the surface of the wall. This raised relief gives a slightly more lifelike appearance, as if the figures are emerging from the walls. Then, on top of that, a layer of colourful paint added vibrancy to the decoration. The raised relief plus painting was incredibly time-consuming and complicated to achieve. Remarkably, Sety's tomb is almost entirely covered in this style of art. It must have been an enormous job. Anyway, I think the workers have finished their digging. Let's begin to explore the tomb. Our visit begins at the entrance, where the long staircase descends from the surface to the first doorway. This first section is undecorated, as is the entryway. But we know the name of this component. Based on other tombs and references, the ancients called the entrance to a royal tomb the Pa Setcha Necher in Wat Shu, that is, the god's passage on the way of Shu, referencing the deity of the air and light. It can also be called the god's passage on the way of Ra, which is worth remembering because a lot of the art and textual decoration in a royal tomb is focused on the sun god and his journey into the underworld. So as you descend the first staircase and approach the entrance, you are embarking upon the way of the light or the sun. In 1817, Belzoni's excavators finally cleared enough rubble away from the entrance that the Italian engineer could enter the monument himself. Like most excavators who have the pleasure to find a royal tomb, Belzoni described his experience as one of surprise. Although the entrance to the tomb was large, suggesting a major find, he was not prepared for the full scope. Quote, "On the 18th of October, I descended, examined the place, and pointed out to the workers where they might dig. In an hour, there was room enough for me to enter through a passage. The appearance indicated that the tomb was of the first rate, but still, I did not expect to find such a one as it really proved to be. This was the entrance into a large and magnificent tomb. The ceiling is finely painted and in pretty good preservation, and each side is sculptured with hieroglyphs in low relief and painted." End quote. The initial corridors were full of rubble and debris, which reached almost to the ceiling. There was enough space to crawl, but not to stand, so Belzoni was seeing a part of the decoration only. As a result, he only records glimpses of the full spectacle, the beautiful ceiling, the style of the carvings, and the surviving vivid paint. Belzoni's description might seem surprisingly brief, but he was publishing in English, which was not his first language, and by his own admission, his personality and inclination was more towards the sciences and mechanical affairs, rather than poetry and literature. It does mean that he struggles to capture the beauty of the art in words, and his description of the monument is more concerned with measurements of the various chambers and describing the minutiae of the carving and sculpture, so we'll have to expand on it as we begin our journey. You cross the threshold and enter the tomb properly. This is a corridor called Pa Secha Netcher Neti Ermech Tu, or the second God's passage, which is behind the first. Pretty self-explanatory. When you enter, the first thing to notice is the decoration, specifically how much there is. Earlier royal tombs, such as Horemheb, Tutankhamun, or Thutmose III, would have their decoration mostly in the inner halls, the burial rooms, the well shaft, or the antechambers. Those would have art and display. Sety I changed that pattern. His monument is the first to be decorated entirely throughout the tomb. After that initial doorway, every surface has some kind of carved or painted imagery. The effect can be quite overwhelming for a visitor. When you first step inside and your eyes adjust to the light, the tomb is a barrage of arcane imagery. To make sense of it, we'll start on the left, the wall that runs down the eastern side of the corridor. This part is the beginning, literally, of the tomb's decoration. To start, we have an image of Sety himself. He stands facing to the right, or the south. The king wears a long, diaphanous robe that flares out around his ankles. His hair is shoulder length and carefully layered in a sort of long bob cut. Sety reaches out with his right hand, palm open, extending towards a deity. In front of Sety, and facing him, there is a man with a falcon's head. This is the god Ra Horakti, or Ra, the Horus of the two horizons. His bird head is adorned with a crown, an enormous sun disk, with a serpent or uraeus at the front. In one hand, at the back, the god holds an Ankh symbol, meaning life. His other hand, at the front, holds a tall scepter with an interesting design. The scepter is called a was, meaning power or dominion. It has a forked base for catching snakes, and the top is shaped like the head of Seth, the very avatar of physical power. Attached to this Seth head, there are two additional symbols: a Jed pillar, meaning endurance or stability, and another Ankh, meaning life. These symbols stretch towards Sety's mouth, as if Ra Horakti offers the king life, stability, and power as Sety enters his tomb. To the right of the pharaoh and god, columns of hieroglyphs begin the monument's texts. In this entrance corridor, we have a specific type of text, known to the ancients as the Book of Praising Ra in the West. Scholars usually call it the Litany of Ra. The Litany of Ra is a New Kingdom funerary text. It first appears in the burial of King Thutmose III, not in his tomb, but on the linen shroud that covered his coffin and body. After that, it periodically shows up on funerary goods belonging to the pharaohs. Sety is the first to use the Litany of Ra as decoration specifically in his tomb. It begins on the left or eastern wall of the entrance corridor, and it starts as follows. Quote, "Beginning the book of praising Ra in the West, praising the unified one who is in the West, that is, Ra unified with Osiris. One reads this book while these images are made in sections upon the ground, in the darkness of the night. What does that mean? It means that Ra achieves victory over his enemies in the West. It is effective for a man on earth, and it is effective for him after he reaches his mooring place, or dies." End quote. The opening section of the litany is kind of an explanation of the text itself. The book praises Ra in various aspects, especially his form of the unified one when he combines with the king of the dead, Usir or Osiris. It also tells the reader how to use the book, that it is divided into sections and it should be read in the darkness of the night. The text even has what we call a gloss, a little explanatory text where it says, "What does that mean? It means this and that," as if the audience is not fully literate in solar theology, and the text itself has to explain what is happening. So, kind of like the Book of the Dead, which also includes glosses or summaries, the Litany of Ra is a little bit of a guide to the underworld and the journey of the deceased. When the soul of King Sety entered his tomb, he could read the texts upon these walls and be assured that he had the necessary knowledge. A good start for an underworld journey. The litany continues along the left and the right walls. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's quite long and complicated and also quite repetitive, but we'll get a chance to see more sections in a moment. As you descend the first corridor, take a moment to look up. Above you, a series of birds appear in a line. These are vultures, a form of the goddess Nekhbet, or she of Nekheb, the town now known as El Kab. Nekhbet appears with wings outstretched, and she wears a crown on her head. That crown takes the form of a white headpiece with ostrich feathers on either side. This crown is called the Atef, and it's usually associated with Usir, or Osiris, and the rule of the underworld. So, Nekhbet appears as a protective deity for the dead. As the soul carries on into the afterlife, he is guarded by the vulture. The ceiling also gives us an introduction to the colors of Sety's tomb. The vultures are painted in red, white, black, and blue, and they stand out on a background of deep blue, with yellow stars filling out the gaps. The idea is pretty clear. The vultures fly through the sky at night, the time of death and Ra's underworld journey. They stretch out their wings to guard the deceased, in this case King Sety, and their plumage stands out brilliantly on the deep blue starry sky. Above the vultures, you will find the cartouches, giving Sety's name as pharaoh. I'll come back to those later, because there's an interesting aspect to their design. For now, let's move on. We leave the first corridor and approach a staircase. It goes down sharply, with ledges or shelves to either side. This part is called Pa Setcha Necher Neti Ermech 3, the third God's Passage. The shelves to the left and right are called Nach Chemi Neti Chetepu na Nejeru, or the recesses in which the gods rest. In antiquity, the shelves were probably supposed to have small statues of deities. They are empty today, but on the walls you will find images of other gods. In this staircase, the litany of Ra continues. Now we have a series of figures, small images of deities, usually male, standing in rows. These are the manifestations, or cheperu, of Ra, and above each one, hieroglyphs give their name, their basic function in the afterlife, and offers of praise. There are more than 100 of these manifestations, too many to name, but among the figures you have interesting examples, like a chap with a beetle head who is named Chepri, literally the manifesting or the appearing, a form of Ra at dawn. There is also a chap with an enormous penis named the Ejaculator, or Aai, which has to be an onomatopoeia, right? Someone decided that that was the sound of a male orgasm and named the deity accordingly. Another god is called the Great Ram, or Ser-Aa, which sounds like a minor pop hit from the 1950s, although I doubt whatever Great Ram would have quite the same ring to it. Finally, a particularly interesting figure is a human prisoner kneeling on the ground with his arms tied to a pole. This being is called the wrongdoer at the mooring post, or Niki Menit, which might be a celestial body. One of the Egyptian constellations was called Menit, the mooring post. Perhaps this human figure was a group of stars adjacent to it. At any rate, you get the idea. The walls of the staircase are lined with elaborate and arcane texts. What they contain is a series of praises, or chekenu, for the sun god, and identification of his forms, or cheperu. The idea is to give the sun god recognition, to keep his name alive, and acknowledge the countless aspects or bodies associated with him. At least some of these are celestial, in the sky at night or dawn. Put them together, and the litany of Ra sets the tone. We are traveling through the sun god's domain. As you descend the staircase, you'll be confronted with two distinct features. First, on the door jamb overhead, a large figure of Ma'at stretches out her wings. She welcomes the deceased and protects him as he descends into the earth. Below that, on the walls to left and right, you will find some interesting art. Large figures of Anubis as a jackal or a wolf recline atop shrines, and their tails hang down at the back. Below them are figures of kneeling women with emblems atop their heads. These goddesses are the sisters Aset, or Isis, and Nebet-Hut, or Nephthys. Aset is on your left, and Nebet-Hut is on your right. They reach out, holding large circular symbols. The symbol is the Shen, which means eternity. So the goddesses offer Sety a long afterlife as he enters the next world. You will note here that the decoration is unfinished. The figures of Anpu, Aset, and Nebet-Hut have been drawn in outline, plastered, and partially carved, but not yet finished or coloured. What's great is that you can see the exact point where the artist stopped. The lower half of the wall, including the figures of the goddesses, have mostly been carved, but at the very top of their heads the sculpture stops, and the wall is finished in black ink. You can even see the guidelines created by the artists. Just behind the symbols or crowns of the goddesses, there are black rectangular lines, which show where the artists had planned the scene and set proper guides to keep everything in proportion. If the wall had been fully carved and painted, those rectangles would have disappeared. But today, we can still see them. And with a touch of imagination, you can imagine the exact moment when the artist put down their chisel or drawing tools, stepped back from the wall, and walked away forever. It's one of those moments where eternity shrinks to nothing. We move on, out of the staircase. Now you enter a second corridor. which the ancients called Setcha Necher Neti Ermech 4, the fourth God's Passage. Kind of repetitive so far, but the names will get more interesting as we go. For decoration, this corridor does not have the litany of Ra. Instead, the walls are adorned with a thick band running diagonally down the registers, and there are numerous serpents. They come in different forms, including large cobras, reared up and ready to strike, snakes riding on boats, and even a large serpent with 3 heads, 4 legs, and a huge pair of bird wings. What you are looking at is the Book of the Hidden Chamber, more commonly known as the Amduat, or that which is in the underworld. It tells of Ra's journey during the night across the many realms of the Duat, the netherworld, and the many places, beings, and deities which he encounters. And this text gives us insights to the journey that the king and you are taking into the earth. Surprisingly, Sety's Amduat does not appear in order. It does not go hour 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Instead, this corridor, which is the first appearance of the text, shows hours 4 and 5, one of the deepest and darkest parts of the Duat in the middle of the night. Here, the god and the king's soul enter a vast desert known as the land of Sokar. Sokar is a falcon deity, a lord of the underworld. He lives in a cave called the Mysterious Cavern, where the sun and Sety can touch the ancient primeval waters, the ocean at the beginning of time called Nun. It is a dark realm, desolate and dangerous, but Sokar protects it and those within as the night reaches its depths. It is a long and elaborate text. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but in hour 4, which you find in this corridor, it includes passages like the following, quote, "Going to rest by the halling, by the person of this god, in the mysterious cavern of the west, caring for those who are within it, by the means of his, the god's, voice, without him seeing them. The name of this cavern is Living of Manifestations, Kepru Ankh. The name of the gate is The One Who Hides the Halling. The name of the hour is Great in Her Power." End quote. As you go down Sety's corridor, the 4th hour is on your right, and the 5th hour is on your left. Enjoy the desert. Maybe take a sip of water. We are just getting started. As you reach the end of the 2nd corridor, you pass a doorway and enter a shaft. This is a space commonly known as the well shaft, a square room at the bottom of the descending passages that reaches down deep below the structure. It is a common feature in tombs of the Valley of the Kings. For the ancients, the shaft was known as Ta Weschet Isek, or the Hall of Waiting. Basically, you're in Sety's waiting room. The meaning of these shafts is a matter of debate. They could be a security feature, to catch water from flooding, or a way to discourage robbers. Or they might have a religious function, symbolically connecting the tomb into the deep, deep underworld. One of these functions, or all of them, might apply. But you get the idea. The shaft is a distinctive feature of the Valley of the Kings, a barrier of some sort between our world and the Duat. Sety's well is at least 3.5 meters deep, but surprisingly, it's never been fully cleared or excavated. Even Belzoni did not attempt that. Despite his engineering experience, the shaft was too deep and too packed with debris. In fact, when he first encountered it, the Italian explorer found himself briefly defeated. Quote, "The more I saw of the tomb, the more I was eager to see, such being the nature of man. But I was checked in my anxiety at this time, for at the end of this passage I reached a large pit which intercepted my progress. This pit is 30 feet deep. The upper part is adorned with figures from the wall of the passage up to the ceiling." End quote. The walls of the shaft are carved and painted with figures of Sety. The king, like you, appears walking into the tomb towards the deeper chambers, and deities face him, greeting him as he comes. Gods like Usir, Osiris, Anpu, Anubis, and Heru Sa-Aset, Horus the son of Isis, and goddesses like Aset Weret, Isis the Great, and Huther, Heri Tep-Waset, Hathor, chief of Waset. They welcome Sety, they offer him water, and they reach out to embrace and anoint him. It is this room that starts to show the colour of Sety's monument on a grandiose scale. The well shaft is decorated in the same style as that of Ramesses I and Horemheb, which makes sense. These three tombs were all decorated within about 15 to 20 years. The artists were probably the same across the three monuments, or at least their sons and apprentices. The carving is delicate, the colours are vibrant, although a bit faded. Sety receives a warm welcome. Originally, the well shaft was sealed. The doorway leading further into the tomb was covered with plaster and paint. The idea was to hide the entrance, perhaps discouraging robbers. It never worked. Anyone knowledgeable enough to locate these monuments and penetrate them knew about the well shafts. Like countless tombs before and after, Sety's pit was a mild inconvenience rather than a true barrier. Inspecting the shaft, Belzoni found evidence of the ancient robberies. Quote, "On the opposite side of the pit, I perceived a small aperture 2 feet wide, and at the bottom of the well a vast quantity of rubbish. A rope fastened to a piece of wood that was laid across the corridor appears to have been used by the ancients for descending into the pit, and from the small aperture on the opposite side hung another rope which reached the bottom, no doubt for the purpose of ascending." End quote. Belzoni had found the robbers' tools, used to access the chambers within. They had jammed a piece of wood across the end of one corridor and used a rope to climb down. Then they used another rope to clamber up the other side. Presumably, the very first robbers had used a length of wood long enough to cross the well shaft to make their initial entry, but once the other door was open, they substituted ropes. Wood was expensive, after all. The opening in the wall, cut through the plaster and paint, was large enough for somebody to crawl through, but the great pit, descending into the dark, had failed as a barrier, at least in antiquity. For Belzoni and the excavators, the well shaft was, initially, an obstacle, one they could not overcome on the first day of exploration. In his description, Belzoni notes the, quote, "impossibility of proceeding at this moment." So Belzoni and his team were stymied. They withdrew from the monument and planned their return. Fortunately, his journey, and ours, had only just begun. Chapter 2. In 1817, Giovanni Belzoni led an excavation team that uncovered the tomb of Sety I. After a couple days' work, Belzoni had entered the monument and descended the initial passages. But he was defeated, momentarily, by the well shaft. Now, he had to find a way through. As he worked, Belzoni observed the telltale signs of flooding. Water had entered the tomb in antiquity, as torrential rains poured into the valley and made their way inside the graves. That water had entered the well shaft, decaying the wood and rope at the entrance to the pit. Belzoni reported this. Quote, "We could clearly perceive that the water which entered the passages ran into this pit, and the wood and rope by the entrance crumbled to dust on touching them. The rope on the inside of the wall, across from the entrance, did not fall to dust, but remained pretty strong, the water having not reached it at all, and the wood to which it was attached was in good preservation." End quote. Unfortunately, we have no idea what happened to this scrap of rope and wood that was still within the tomb. It may have gone to some museum or private collection, but there is no record of its whereabouts. Belzoni and his friends had retreated from the tomb, but they were back the next day. Belzoni brought a long plank of wood, and he managed to extend it over the pit and thread it through the aperture. Now, Belzoni and his friends entered the tomb properly. Everything, so far, had been a mere introduction. Impressive, for sure. Beautiful, certainly. But now, the true marvels began. Quote, "The next day, the 19th, by means of a long beam of wood, we succeeded in sending a man up into the aperture of the well shaft, and having contrived to make a bridge, we crossed the pit. We found ourselves in a beautiful hall in which there were 4 pillars. The paintings became more perfect as we advanced further into the interior. They retained their gloss, a kind of varnish over the colours, which had a beautiful effect. The figures are painted on a white background." End quote. Belzoni's descriptions of the art and copies of the scenes made by him and friends are important. You see, they confirm something about the style of decoration and its initial impression. Today, Sety's tomb has faded somewhat from its initial luster and glory. Damage to the monument by early travellers and the effects of light and moisture from mass tourism have caused many scenes to fade and lose some splendour. But Belzoni's description confirms that, originally, Sety's monument was just as brilliant and vibrant as another nearly contemporary tomb, the burial of Nefertari. Today, the tomb of Queen Nefertari is the most beautiful preserved from antiquity, but that tomb was discovered much more recently and has received much better conservation and care, preserving its colours far more brilliantly. But in 1817, Sety's tomb might have been equally marvellous, a panoply of vibrant colours on pristine white backgrounds. Alas, the king's monument has suffered far more than the later queen. But if one looks at the scenes in Sety's tomb and compares them with those of Nefertari, you can, perhaps, imagine the brilliance. It must have been astonishing. Belzoni and his friends passed the well shaft successfully. Now they entered the next chamber, and what a chamber it was. As you leave the well shaft, you enter a large hall. It has 4 pillars supporting the ceiling, and around the walls a riot of colour unfolds. This is a room that the ancients called Ta Weschet Merchet, or the Chariot Hall. Another name was Ta Weschet der Sebiu, or the Hall of Repelling the Rebels. Either way, it is a place for military tools and actions, a place for dealing with the outside world and defeating any threats, which is reflected in the art. This hall is decorated with scenes from the Book of Gates, a text that first shows up in the tomb of Horemheb about a decade earlier. So, for Sety I, the Book of Gates was probably new and fashionable in a religious sense. The pillared hall has the 5th and 6th hours of the Book of Gates. You will find hour 5 on your left as you enter the room, and hour 6 on your right. In hour 5, the gods organize the world, dividing humanity into 4 distinct groups: Egyptians, Nubians, Libyans, and Easterners. This hour runs around the wall on the left, divided in 3 registers. If you are looking for the ethnic groups, they are at the very bottom on the left, with a deity watching over them. In hour 6, Ra must face his enemy, the great devourer, the serpent Apep or Apophis. Apep appears as a long snake, with human heads, his victims, emerging from his body. Apep is incredibly dangerous, but here he has been restrained, and a bodyguard of deities march along, carrying Apep and preventing him from attacking. Additional gods follow this bodyguard, each one carrying a stick with a forked base, the sort of tool you would use to catch a snake in our world. So this hall is devoted to categorizing and repelling enemies, both human and divine, and setting the world in a safe and tidy order. The Book of Gates ensures this. On the south wall of this hall, Sety himself appears, standing before Usir Genti Ementiu, or Osiris, the foremost of Westerners, and the goddess Hathor Imentet, Hathor of the West. Sety is accompanied by Heru, or Horus, who wears the double crown of the eternal ruler. These scenes look quite simple, but they convey an important message, a sense of transformation. Sety, in life, was the living avatar of Horus, and he now approaches the form that he will inhabit for eternity. Sety leaves his earthly incarnation and will become Usir, king of the dead. It was a transformation repeated every generation, countless times since the gods ruled on earth. Sety was Horus. Sety's father was Horus. His father, his father's father, his father's 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 father. His father. The gods welcome the king. The cycle continues. At this point, we reach a fork in the road. From Sety's pillared hall with the Book of Gates, you can carry on further into the tomb, or you can take a moment for a brief side chamber. Let's pop in there. It won't take long. On the south side of the Hall of Chariots, another pillared hall opens up. This one is smaller, just 2 columns, and it's notable for having unfinished decoration. The stonemasons have excavated the chamber, and they've smoothed the walls. Then the artists have come in, preparing the surface, and they've done the initial drafts of the scenes. But there, the work stops. There is no carving and no color. The room is frozen in a state of semi-completion. It's quite cool. If you look around, you can still see the handiwork of the ancient artists. The guiding lines meant to keep scenes straight are still visible behind some of the figures. The preliminary sketches, drawn in red ink, are visible at the edges of deities and animals. The corrected layer, the final proofs, are drawn in black ink, and this makes up the majority of the walls. That's the part that would have been carved and filled with color had the artists finished the job. But as it stands, the room preserves a taste of work in progress. Like the earlier staircase, you can easily imagine the moment when the artists picked up their brushes and left the tomb. Eternity shrinks to a moment. The walls of this chamber have additional hours from the Amduat. This time we are in hours 9, 10, and 11, in which Ra dispenses offerings and gifts to the deceased. It is a long and elaborate series of events. For now, just know that this chamber includes 3 of the later hours of the Amduat's nightly tale. Returning to the large pillared hall, we head to the eastern wall on the left from the entrance. Now it is time to go deeper into the tomb. At this point, we seem to be crossing an ancient threshold. Based on texts and references, a New Kingdom royal tomb had 2 sections. The upper half included the rooms that we've just seen, and the lower half covers the next part. The distinction has an artistic and theological component as well. In the upper section, the imagery and texts focus on Ra and deities associated with the East. But in the lower section, the focus shifts slightly to Usir, Osiris, and deities associated with the West. So as you move off the main axis and begin descending, you are crossing the threshold in more ways than one. Welcome to the kingdom of Usir. You descend a staircase, angled about 40 degrees, and enter a long corridor. This is the Secha Netcher Ker Tepi en Wepet, the first god's passage of the opening. The opening of what, exactly? Well, in Sety's tomb, it's the opening of the mouth. To your left and right, the walls of this corridor show Sety. The king appears in a large figure with a table of offerings. Then, in the rest of the scenes, Sety appears as a statue, and priests make offerings to his image and perform the ceremony called the opening of the mouth. The opening of the mouth is a funerary ritual, and an incredibly important one. Despite its name, it touches on multiple faculties of the deceased: the mouth, ears, nose, and eyes. Performing this rite allows the object, either a statue or a mummy, to awaken in the next world, to breathe, to see, to speak, to eat, and to hear. Performing this rite allows the dead to live once more. The rituals are long, but here's an example. Quote, "The companions will go around the deceased 4 times with the 4 red jars of water. They say, 'Your purification is the purification of Horus, of Sutech, Seth, of Jehuti, Thoth, and Dunanwi. Words to be spoken 4 times. Pure, pure for the deceased. Take the water that is in the red eyes of Horus. Jehuti is the one purifying him entirely as his task. The Sem priest, the Lector priest, the opening of the mouth and eyes 4 times. O deceased, I have come as your embracer. I am Horus. I have pressed your mouth for you. I am your son, whom you love. I have opened your mouth for you." End quote. The ceremonies continue in the next corridor at the bottom of a short staircase. I won't repeat the description here. But as you go, you might notice a couple of things. The priests change in each scene. They offer different things, like burning candles, incense, and water. At the end, on your right, they even offer him the leg of a bull, called Mesketiu, which represents the defeat of Osiris's enemy, the long-horned bull, which is Seth. The ritual scenes displayed on these walls serve an important function. As the king's statues and his body come into the tomb, they need to be awakened to have power in the next world. All the necessary information is contained on these walls. Pass along the 2 corridors and you will enter another large room, lined with figures of the king and deities welcoming him. This room is called Ta Weskhet Ma'at, the Hall of Ma'at, or the Hall of Truth. Belzoni, remember him, was particularly impressed with this hall. Remarking on its art, the explorer said, quote, "We entered a small chamber about 20 feet by 13 feet, to which I gave the name the Room of Beauties, for it is adorned with the most beautiful figures in low relief, and painted. When standing in the center of this chamber, the traveler is surrounded by an assembly of Egyptian gods and goddesses." End quote. Along the walls, Sety strides towards a variety of beings. One by one, the king meets Hathor of the West, Hathor Imentet, Anpu, Anubis, Hathor again, Horus, the son of Isis, Heru Sa Aset, Hathor a 3rd time, and Osiris the Beautiful, Usir Wen Nefer. The deities stand like statues, holding their scepters and insignia. Sety reaches out, offering small jars, called Nu jars, which are filled with water or libations for the gods. In turn, the Great Ones speak words of greeting for the king. As his image marches towards the burial chamber, he is welcomed by the lords of Sky and West. The room is beautiful, but really it's kind of a repeat of the well shaft, just larger and a bit more detailed. But at this point, we are really close to the pièce de résistance. I would hate to dawdle so close to the main event. Let's carry on and enter the burial chamber. You cross the threshold and enter the room of Sety's sleep. This is Ta Wesket Neti Heteptu Im, the hall in which one rests. It can also have the name Per Nebu, the House of Gold. As I'm sure you can imagine from tombs like Tutankhamun, this must have been a splendid place. Gilded furniture and shrines, statues sheathed in gold, vessels and ornaments of highly polished stone, weapons, jewelry, accessories, and more. For a king like Sety, the Per Nebu must have been spectacular. The hall itself is vast, 14 meters long and 8 meters wide, with smaller chambers radiating off the sides. The main hall is divided in 2, an upper part with square pillars, and a lower part where the king's mummy would lie. The upper section is beautiful, adorned with images from the Book of Gates, hours 2, 3, and 5. You can enjoy those at your leisure, but they aren't the main attraction. That comes in the lower half of the room, so let's go straight there. You pass the square pillars, 6 in total. At first, the ceiling is low, but as you reach the end of the columns, the roof suddenly soars upward. Sety's burial chamber is noteworthy for having a high, curved roof. This is a first for the Valley of the Kings. The barrel-vaulted arch reaches 6 meters above the floor. When you enter for the first time, the wows come easy and breathy. The walls of this space are covered in hieroglyphs and figures. The scenes in this section belong to the Amduat, hours 1, 2, and 3. But you probably won't notice them too closely, because your eyes will inevitably go up. Like many tombs, the roof of Sety's burial hall is decorated with stars. Unlike most tombs, though, this one is not the generic yellow 5-pointed stars on a field of blue. Instead, the artists have filled Sety's vault with constellations. A group of figures appear on the northern side of the ceiling. They come in different forms, both animal and human, and their bodies, painted yellow, are dotted with large red circles. These mark the major stars that form the constellation bodies. Sety's tomb is not the first to have an astronomical motif, nor would it be the last, and scholars have studied the various ceilings, comparing the scenes and texts to identify their meaning and at least some of the constellations. At the center of the group, you'll see a human male standing with one arm raised and one arm before him. This is Orion. Directly above, there is an enormous bull, which corresponds to Ursa Major, also known as the Big Dipper. To the left is a lion, Leo, and in the bottom right, a figure called Anu, which is possibly the lynx, but it's shown as a man stretching a cord between upraised hands. The other constellations seem to be unknown or uncorrelated with modern classification, but this scene is the centerpiece. Around the constellation, there are decans, groups of gods, or stars, that seem to represent regular periods of 10 days each. Each decan has a cluster of beings within it, and hieroglyphs naming the gods. I won't read all of them, but some of the stars include Horus, or Heru, Seth, which is written as Setesh, Duamutef, one of the sons of Horus, and Aset, or Isis. There are many others, but we'd be here all day. What is the point of this ceiling? Well, the stars have always been closely associated with the afterlife of the king. Going back to the Old Kingdom, the age of the pyramid texts, it is the nighttime sky where the ruler ascends to join the immortal gods. That motif carried on over the centuries, and even the name of the underworld, Duat, is actually spelled with a star, or Dua. So the constellations and decans have always been a domain of gods. But the astronomical ceilings take them to a more literal level, almost providing a map of the nighttime sky. When you include the decans, which cover the entire year, Sety could sleep beneath a sort of star calendar, providing him with guidance at any part of the annual cycle. So the star ceiling is not just a pretty decoration, it has a practical and religious purpose as well, and the king would benefit from its inclusion. At the center of the hall, beneath the starry vault, Sety would have lain in his sarcophagus, a beautiful casket made of high-quality stone. The sarcophagus is no longer there. We'll come back to why a bit later. And if you visit the hall, you will also note a staircase leading down, with a small door and metal gate at the bottom. That provides access to a tunnel that carries on further into the mountain. Again, we'll return to that a bit later. First, let's finish the burial chamber. Radiating off from the burial hall are a series of side rooms. Some of them are closed, you can't go in today. Others are open. All of them are interesting in their own way. At the southern end of the burial chamber, on the far left corner when you are facing along the axis, there is a small niche cut into the wall. It's about a meter wide, and it has an image of Usir, Osiris, inside. He stands mummified within a shrine, with banners of animal skins beside. To his right, on the next wall, a large figure of Anpu, Anubis, performs the opening of the mouth. The alcove is a cool little feature. I'm rather fond of it. Slightly north of this Usir niche, on the left side of the burial hall, there is a large pillared room. Usually you can't go in, but it has an interesting physical feature. The chamber has a bench, a kind of sideboard, running around the edge. The purpose of this room is unclear. It may have been a storage space for important religious items or tools. We don't know. The decoration in that room is the Amduat, hours 6 and 7, in which Ra distributes offerings to the deserving, and where Usir, Osiris, casts down his foes. In hour 6 of the Amduat, we hear the following, quote, "This god, Ra, decrees the giving of offerings to the Duat dwellers. He stops beside them so that they may see him and have power over their fields, so that their provisions appear with them, by means of that which this great God decrees to them. The name of this field is the Well of the Duat dwellers. It is the path of Ra's night boat." End quote. So this is a place of dispensation, of providing things that are needed in the afterlife. Then, in hour 7, we have passages like this, quote, "Thus says this great god, Ra, to Usir, Osiris, who is within the encircling serpent, Mehen. He says, Osiris, foremost of the Duat, the living Lord, the ruler of the West, life be unto you, so that you live completely. Cast down your enemies beneath your feet. Make power over those who act against you. The flame of living of visible forms will be against them, so that he, the flame, might consume them. I know you, Osiris, every day. Always I pass by you in peace." End quote. So in this chamber, which is facing east towards the sunrise and resurrection, we have the sun god speaking directly to the king of the dead. That seems fitting, given that little Osiris niche is just next door to this chamber on the main burial hall. This is a place of predicting the dawn and preparing for it with supplies and dispensation. Ra meets with Osiris, and they predict his triumph over all enemies. It's a beautiful room, and although you can't go inside, do take a look from the doorway. The sharp-eyed among you might even notice interesting details, like on your right when you are looking in, you can see a figure lying horizontally with a great serpent around him. This is part of hour 7, just over halfway through the night and one of the darkest moments before the coming dawn. It has a caption that says, "It is the corpse of Khepri within his own flesh, and he of many faces is the protector." End quote. In other words, one of the forms of Ra, Khepri, Ra at the dawn, lies horizontally in a moment of temporary death. He will come back to life at the next dawn, but here, in the darkest moments of the night, his power is almost extinguished. While Khepri, Ra, lies in a temporary death, he is protected by the great serpent. This serpent has several heads, and a caption above calls him Many Faces, or Asha Heru. It is a charming little scene that you can just see on the right as you poke your head into the room. I recommend seeking it out. Slightly north of that room, just to the left of the chamber entrance, there is another tiny room. You can go into this one sometimes if the guard is feeling friendly. It is decorated with the Book of Gates, hour 4. This is the second time that this hour appears in the tomb. The room includes images of Ra aboard his night boat, and he sails past shrines containing mummies. The sun god also approaches the goddesses representing the hours, who are symbolically eaten by their mother, a serpent, and reborn before the next night. In hour 4, we hear the following, quote, Ra says, May you haul me, Duat dwellers, those whom I have beheld. It is I who have made you. Stretch out your arms and haul my boat with them. Go back to the eastern part of the sky, to the places that raise the one who made it. This light will be to those surrounded by the gods when they receive me. Haul me while I protect you. End quote. As Ra sails the sky, he passes shrines in which lie the bodies of the deceased, awaiting their reawakening. And below them we see Osiris, foremost of the Westerners, standing in a shrine with his bodyguard. Finally, a group of deities tend to a series of rooms in which there are flames. These caverns of fire are watched over by the deity Atum, the one who is complete. In short, Hour 4 sees many aspects of the night brought together, the righteous dead awaiting their resurrection, and a place where those who are condemned will go and suffer terribly. It is a dark, but kinda cool, chapter of the night. Finally, directly across from that room, to the right of the main entrance, there is another small chamber. A chamber with a cow, a sky cow. In a tiny room on the west side of the burial chamber, we have the Book of the Heavenly Cow. This is the first time that text was carved on the walls of a tomb. I covered this story recently in episode 201. It tells of time immemorial when the sun god Ra ruled on earth, but humanity was troublesome and rebelled against Ra. To punish them, Ra sent forth Hathor, who rampaged among humanity in her form of Sekhmet. The slaughter was terrible, although not described explicitly, and it was only with great care and cunning that Ra could bring the goddess back to calm. Following the slaughter, Ra withdrew into the sky, traveling on the back of Nut, the sky cow, where he took up his place, and the world as we know it came into being. This little chamber is open sometimes. When you step inside, you will be confronted primarily with the image of the cow herself, and around the other walls the text unfolds the story. If you get a chance to go inside, it is a special little space. Sety's burial chamber is possibly the most impressive ever built. It is not the best preserved in terms of colors, but for size and complexity in decoration, it might be the best. Well, maybe there's one that's better, but we'll talk about that in future. The tomb made a strong impression on Belzoni. Trying to summarize it, he simply said, quote, To give an accurate description of the various artworks within this tomb would be a work above my capacity. Fair enough, his description does focus on technical matters, architecture, measurements, and the evidence for ancient work methods. Belzoni was a mechanically minded individual, more than a poet, and frankly, even the greatest wordsmith would struggle to capture the magnificence of this monument, the skill with which the ancient builders and artists sculpted Sety's sepulchre. So, in the account, Belzoni basically says, This room is too impressive for me to capture in words, and he turns his attention to the physical details. For now, we'll leave Belzoni to his measuring and focus on the burial. What did Sety take into his afterlife? What fragments of that burial survive? We'll look at these items, and that secret tunnel below the burial chamber. That is after the break. See you in a moment. Chapter 3. By the time Belzoni and his excavation entered the tomb, Sety's monument was largely empty. Centuries of robbery had broken and removed most of the burial goods. Only a few fragments have survived from antiquity. One of the most common items recovered was Shabti figures. These are the tiny statues, shaped like mummies, that were designed to come to life in the next world and perform work for the deceased. Shabtis are extremely common in most burials, and several of Sety's have survived, and they're in museums in Egypt and overseas. Beyond the Shabtis, the only other significant piece is a statue made of wood. It is about a meter tall, and it shows Sety, or at least a human male, seated. His arms and legs are gone, unfortunately, but the statue retains some of the black resin varnish, similar to those found in the tomb of Tutankhamun. There's no gold, of course, the robbers got to that pretty early on, but the statue preserves part of its visage, bearing a serene expression. It's a nice piece for what remains. Finally, Belzoni did report the discovery of a bull carcass that had been embalmed and placed in one of the side chambers. This might be the remains of an Apis bull or one of the other sacred animals, but he didn't record what happened to it, and I haven't found any reference to the bull in a museum collection. So we'll put a pin in that one for now and hope more information turns up. Those shattered fragments are all that remain of the actual burial goods. When it comes to the coffins and sarcophagus, we do have a bit more to say. Of the surviving pieces, by far the largest and most impressive is Sety's stone sarcophagus. It is made of travertine, also known as alabaster, and decorated with funerary texts. The sarcophagus is, well, we say sarcophagus, but that implies something rectangular and sharp. Sety's casket is different. It's actually more like a coffin. The stone casket is anthropoid, or human-shaped. Imagine something like the coffins of Tutankhamun, but made of a white translucent stone. Unfortunately, the lid of the sarcophagus is gone, destroyed in antiquity, and only fragments remained when Belzoni entered the tomb. There are enough pieces to guess how it looked, but not enough to restore it. Alas, only the bottom half is still intact. At the bottom of that casket, where Sety's body would lie, there is a large figure of Nut, the sky goddess, and around the walls, on the inside and outside, the artists carved a complete rendition of the Book of Gates, from hour 1 to hour 12, with the extra scenes and interludes. Sety's stone casket has one of the most complete and best preserved copies of that book. Again, the Book of Gates was relatively new when Sety was building his tomb. It first appeared in the monument of Horemheb around 1310 BCE, so the Book of Gates may have been fresh and novel at the time. As a result, Sety's tomb has multiple chambers decorated with parts of the book, and his casket includes an additional full copy. Sety's casket was still in the tomb when Belzoni entered, but later it was acquired, quote-unquote, by the British consul Henry Salt. It went to London, and the plan was to sell it along with Salt's other antiquities to the collection of the British Museum. But the relationship between Salt and Belzoni broke down into recriminations and financial disputes. That's a whole other story, but the long and short of it is that the sarcophagus was offered to the British Museum, but they turned it down, and Salt eventually sold it to a private bidder. That buyer was the architect Sir John Soane, a prominent designer in his time. Today, the sarcophagus resides in the Soane Museum in London. This museum was established in Soane's actual home as a collection of art and artifacts that he had acquired in life. Unfortunately, the Soane Museum is designed to, as closely as possible, preserve and replicate the house as it appeared in Soane's day, the early 1800s. What that means is the display cases are wood and glass, temperature controls are rudimentary at best, and while the museum seems to have a sophisticated conservation team, well, it's not hard to feel that Sety's casket deserves something better. Hopefully, one day, the Egyptian government can rescue it. Sety's stone casket, or sarcophagus, survives partially. What about his coffin? Well, that's trickier. We have a coffin in which Sety's mummy was discovered. That lay in the royal cache at Deir el-Bahari, discovered in 1881. But the coffin in which Sety lay might not be his original coffin. The design of this piece has more in common with 18th dynasty models, and originally it might have belonged to a woman. That is an argument put forth by Dr. Peter Lacovara in a recent article. I won't go into details here, but Dr. Lacovara did kindly join the podcast to discuss this particular question. I'll release that interview in a couple of days. As for Sety's mummy, that also lay in the royal cache. I discussed it last episode, 204, but long story short, just as the tomb is the highest artistry and design, Sety's mummy also shows the finest quality embalming. Beautifully preserved, his features so delicate he may almost be sleeping. It is not hard to imagine Sety lying in those magnificent chambers. Encased in the stone casket, with constellations above, the king could sleep eternally. There is one last feature that is worth discussing. It was underneath the sarcophagus when Belzoni entered the monument. Today, a small doorway and metal gate keep this feature safe, because at the bottom of Sety's burial chamber, there is a tunnel. When Belzoni entered this hall in 1817, the tunnel was partially concealed by rubble and stone slabs level with the floor, but as always, ancient robbers had penetrated it, allowing Belzoni to discern its existence and make some initial explorations. He didn't get that far. As the tunnel goes down, the air quality rapidly degrades, because you are in a confined space further and further away from the surface. And in ancient days, when the tomb was partially open, animals had made their nests down here. Belzoni described the tunnel as, quote, a subterranean passage leading downwards, about 300 feet in length. 100 feet from the entrance, there is a staircase in good condition, but the rock below changes its substance, becoming a kind of black, rotten slate, which crumbles into dust only by touching. At the end of this passage, we found a great quantity of bat's dung, which had choked it up. End quote. Belzoni's excavation reached approximately 100 meters, or 300 feet, but they were unable to continue. The Valley of the Kings is built of successive layers of different rock, and the deeper the tunnel goes, it cuts through some of those layers. By Belzoni's note, part of it is a sort of slate that is very friable or fragile to the touch, so further work and the poor air quality made it impossible to carry on. In 1902, a young archaeologist named Howard Carter organized conservation work in the tomb of Sety I. As part of that, he arranged a metal gate and modern brick arches to protect the entrance to the tunnel. They didn't want people just going down willy-nilly, possibly injuring themselves or damaging the structure. In 1961, a local Egyptian named Sheikh Ali Abdel Rasul spent about 20 days re-excavating the tunnel. He apparently did this with permission from the local antiquities service, but the goal was to hopefully find treasure, a secret burial chamber somewhere at the bottom. There was no result on that excavation. In the 1970s, the Theban Mapping Project, led by Professor Kent Weeks, surveyed the tunnel once again, but they advised great caution for anyone hoping to excavate. Quote, the passageway is an extremely dangerous one to penetrate. Any archaeologist seeking to explore it should be forewarned. The stone is fragile, the air is poor, and the braces are weak. Care and study are necessary, and most important, proper equipment should be available. End quote. So the tunnel defeated multiple attempts at survey and exploration. Between 1817 and the end of the 20th century, very few people got as far as Belzoni had, and even then, only with great difficulty. Finally, in 2007, the Supreme Council of Antiquities, now the Ministry of Antiquities, approved and supervised a new excavation. This lasted for 3 years, and it seems to have reached the absolute end of the tunnel. The Egyptian excavation reached 174 meters further on. That's almost twice as far as Belzoni had managed to dig. As they went, they found tiny fragments of items, like shabtis of Sety, and faience beads from necklaces or jewellery. They also found broken bits of wood, possibly from the original construction tools. But they faced the same challenges as everyone else. The low quality of the rock meant that every foot or meter of excavation required great care and strengthening and stabilization. The air quality continues to be a challenge. The further down you go, the CO2 levels increase dramatically, and it requires modern pumps to get the CO2 out and fresh air in. But even that is easier said than done. The tunnel itself starts at the bottom of Sety's burial chamber, which is already 200 meters into the bedrock. So it's not just a case of running a pipe up to the burial chamber, you have to run a pipe all the way up to the entrance of the tomb, and that requires a great deal more power to get the airflow going. So you can see why it took 3 seasons to do this excavation, and how difficult the physical experience must have been. Ultimately, the excavation ended at a dead end. The tunnel seems to stop about 174 meters down. Unfortunately, at the end, there was nothing. No hidden chamber, not even a doorway, not even the traces of a larger structure that might be concealed. As you can imagine, that creates problems for scholars trying to understand this tunnel. What is the point of this thing? It goes down a long way, but it doesn't seem to have any obvious purpose. There are a couple of ideas. One interpretation is that this passage was supposed to have a chamber at the end, a kind of true or secret burial chamber, in which Sety's mummy, or perhaps a statue, might actually be buried. That burial chamber seems to have never been constructed, and Sety's mummy obviously lay within the true burial chamber further up. The idea that this was meant to be a secret or symbolic burial chamber is not totally out of the question. In older days, especially the Pyramid Age, kings had built subsidiary tombs south of their main monument, which, in some cases, may have been intended to hold a statue or symbolic burial for their soul. Notably, the tunnel in Sety's tomb is going south, exactly like those older monuments. So it's possible that the king was consciously mimicking an earlier tradition. It just never got completed. Another interpretation is that the tunnel might be trying to reach groundwater. Sety's monument at Abydos, the Osirion, is quite notable for having a water feature within its burial chamber. It's possible that Sety's architects were trying to connect the king's monument in the Valley of the Kings to the water table down below in order to reach part of the kingdom of Osiris. It seems like they failed. There is no evidence for groundwater in the tunnel itself, and they probably would have had to go quite a lot deeper before reaching the water table. But failure or not, that might have been the idea. These are the main hypotheses about the secret tunnel. It could be for a symbolic burial chamber south of the main one, or it could be an attempt to reach the underworld in a symbolic or literal sense. For now, we don't have any firm answers. Either of those, or both, or something else, are entirely possible. Without ancient texts or architectural descriptions of this feature, we can only speculate on its function. Still, it's a curious part of the monument, one that was not replicated in other tombs. After taking in the burial chamber as best as you can, it is time to make your way back out. It is a long walk through the corridors, passages, and chambers on your way back up to the surface. Take your time, catch your breath, and enjoy the scenes that you might have missed on the way down. The monument of Sety I can be quite overwhelming. It is too much to take in on a single visit, and even the most skilled wordsmith would struggle to capture the beauty and complexity of the art and decoration. I have no illusion that this little description has provided anything close to a proper appreciation of the tomb's majesty. But As you explore these passages and chambers, either in person or through photographs and digital models, I hope it can be of some use and benefit. For now, let us make our way out of the tomb, slowly, taking our time, and then look at the afterlife of Sety's monument. The tomb was discovered in 1817. What has happened since then? And looking back, what does all of it mean? When Belzoni and his friends entered the monument of Sety I in 1817, the hieroglyphs remained largely mysterious. But due to its splendor, the monument quickly became famous, and Belzoni promoted it as well. As a result, it ultimately became known as Belzoni's tomb, and it was several years before scholars could decipher hieroglyphs and identify it as Sety I. Ironically, the decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphs would still have presented a problem initially. You see, throughout this monument, you won't actually find the name Sety. The name Sety derives from the god Sutech, or Seth. It can be pronounced in different ways, like Sety, Setechi, or even Suti, depending on how it is spelled. But one thing is consistent. The hieroglyphs for this name include an image of the god Seth. But in Egyptian thought and religion, images and words have their own magical power and property, and what is written can be magically effective in this world and the next. As a result, the ancient artists, or priests, did not want to include the image of Seth himself within the king's name. So whenever you see Sety's cartouche, they actually substitute the Seth hieroglyph with a figure of Osiris. As a result, Sety doesn't actually appear in his tomb as Sety, but rather as Usiri. This is a pattern that appears in other temples, like Sety's great monument at Abydos, and his memorial temple close to the Nile in Luxor. Any chapel or section that is dedicated to Osiris will use this alternate spelling of the name. Chapels dedicated to other gods or to the king himself, they'll use the Seth hieroglyph just fine. But here in the tomb, in the realm of Osiris himself, it is the name Usiri that dominates the scenes. In 1821, Belzoni held an exhibition in London showing some of his discoveries in Egypt. This exhibition included a copy of the tomb of Sety I, and even some original scenes. Belzoni and other visitors in the 1800s would sometimes cut sections from the walls and take them back to their home countries. They would also use a technology called squeezers. Squeezers are where you apply wet wax or paper to the image, which creates a kind of negative when drawn away. Unfortunately, the moisture damages the plaster and removes the paint, so there are many sections in Sety's tomb where it seems curiously blank, as if all the color has been removed. Those areas are the places where older visitors applied squeezers to the monument in order to take away the copy for themselves. It was a terribly destructive form of visitation, and Belzoni was certainly guilty of it. Belzoni partially cleared the tomb, but ultimately, his excavation caused more problems than it solved. For one thing, the entrance to the tomb, which had been covered by rubble and silt, was now open and exposed. Belzoni started to build some new barriers and walls outside the entrance to protect it from rain and water, but he failed to complete them before he left Egypt for good. As a result, torrential downpours did enter the chambers of Sety I just a few years after its opening. This further damaged the art and the paint, especially in the upper parts of the structure. It was a calamity entirely avoidable, resulting from the excavation. In 1825, an artist and conservator named James Burton completed Belzoni's flood barriers, helping to protect the tomb properly. Today, the site has an impressively high wall surrounding its entryway. It is hard to completely protect a tomb from rain without installing a roof over the entrance, but for now, Sety does have some protective barriers. Despite that post-excavation damage, there has been some positive development in the realm of scientific study. Recently, a research project named Factum Arte undertook the laborious task of digitally scanning Sety's monument. They photographed every inch of the decoration and used it to construct 3D models of the monument, and then to create a replica. Using photography of the tomb as it currently stands, along with scenes that are now in museums, the team was able to reconstruct portions that have been damaged in antiquity or by travelers during the 1800s. The result was an exhibition in which you could walk through a facsimile of Sety's tomb, or at least sections of it, with the goal of bringing the monument back to life in a non-destructive and easily accessible manner. It's a wonderful undertaking that Factum Arte has also done for the tomb of Tutankhamun nearby in Luxor. Hopefully, one day, we might even have a full-scale replica of the monument somewhere in the region, in which you can see the colours as they would have originally appeared. For now, the work of Factum Arte and other groups like it is an excellent example of how careful use of modern technologies can bring these monuments back to life. Hopefully, the future is bright in that regard. For Belzoni, the discovery of this tomb was one of the highlights of his career, and he reflected on it in his publication in 1822. Quote, "I may call this, the day of discovery, a fortunate day, one of the best, perhaps, of my life. I do not mean to say that fortune has made me rich, for I do not consider all rich men fortunate. But she has given me that satisfaction, that extreme pleasure which wealth cannot purchase, the pleasure of discovering what has been long sought in vain, and of presenting the world with a new and perfect monument, appearing as if just finished on the day we entered it. And what I found in it will show its great superiority to all others." End quote. The discovery was so impressive that it might have clouded Belzoni's judgment somewhat. Having completed a couple of seasons of excavation in the Valley of the Kings, Belzoni later remarked, quote, "It is my firm opinion that in the valley there are no more tombs than are now known." End quote. In other words, Belzoni felt that the excavations he and his team had made had probably discovered the last of the burial chambers contained within the valley. He was extraordinarily wrong. In the 200-plus years since Belzoni's excavation, another 38 tombs have been identified in the valley. Not all of them are kings, some of them are royal family members or courtiers, or simply anonymous. But the point is, the valley was far from exhausted. Hopefully, modern excavators are a little bit more humble about what the future may hold. And the 200 years since Belzoni have proved one thing time and again. Any time we think we've run out of tombs, something else comes to light. Realistically, there probably are additional tombs, perhaps even intact burials concealed within the rocks and cliffs. The Valley of the Kings has not given up all of its secrets, not by a long shot. And while the tomb of Sety I was an early highlight, no one can say what the future might hold. Thanks for listening. The History of Egypt podcast is supported by you, the listeners. I would especially like to thank the priests, the top-tier supporters on patreon.com, who help bring the offerings to the royal tombs, who perform the opening of the mouth so that I can see this research material and speak these stories for your benefit. Special thanks must go to Linda, Eric, Terry, TJ, Yola, Mycost, Andy and Chelsea, Nidin, Ashley, Veronica, James, Arthur, Karen, Jeffrey, Jean, Si Yin, Dan, and Chris. Folks, you are far too generous. I am eternally in your debt, and I hope this exploration of the tomb of Sety I goes some way to remuneration. I would also like to extend my thanks to the other supporters on Patreon at the hereditary noble, overseer, and scribe level. I can't name you all individually, but please know that I am deeply grateful to each and every one of you for your support. Episodes like this take a long time to produce, with many, many hours of research and, occasionally, quite expensive materials. It is through all of your generosity that I am able to take that necessary time, Folks, thank you one and all for your support. It is endlessly generous, and I am most grateful. To everyone listening, whether Patreon or public, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have enjoyed this guided tour through the tomb of Sety I, a monument that I think you could justify in calling the finest tomb